First anniversary. Pang ilan? First. First, and already 10th year, but first as year. Yeah. And as ISI. Max. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy I'm coming after Rani's talk because there he already lays out what critical theory is and what it does. And I would just like to push it further because you already made suggestions like how do we do critical theory in the Philippines? Wala akong slides. Wala akong slides para mapilitan kayong makinig. Kunwari lang yun, pero tamad lang talaga akong slides. Anyway, so I'm just gonna read my paper and then later on do an I'll start by reading my paper. So I will stay within the time. Hindi ako magkakaroon. But then I think I'll go further. Anyway, so there. There's an important philosophical tradition in our country that is rooted in the critical theory school of thought. I think marami sa atin talaga nagsusulat within that tradition. This tradition focuses its research on the critique of Philippine socio-economic realities using the lenses of discourse theory. There's a lot of discourse theory. And the ideology critiques of mass society, westernization, neoliberalism, and capitalism. I've been asked to referee in many journals in the Philippines, and I noticed that there's that pattern. This philosophical tradition has been very useful in recognizing the complexities of consumerism, multiculturalism, globalization, and post-colonial struggles for self-determination. In most of our modern conferences, the critical theories are very present as guides for interpreting our societies and the problematic lives we build in this postmodern, post-colonial, and post-metaphysical epoch. Because of this tradition, the tradition of Filipinos using critical theory, Filipino scholars have been given a tool with which they can expose the underlying ideological and structural substructures, the ideological and superstructural substructures, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, that frame the suffering of their people and with it imagine possible paths of development and liberation. Diba? That's what we do. We try to apply critical theory in order to understand what's keeping our people poor. Why can't we follow laws? Why can't we have a decent electoral system? Things like that. However, given that the tools used to critique the ideologies that frame us are themselves framed by the Western, perhaps even modernist minds that frame the ideologies, our critical theories may lack what they profess to offer us. That is, the deep critique of society that unearths the ground which supports the naivete of Western man's global world building. What do I mean by this? Let us look at one of the most important and most useful of critical theory scholars, Jürgen Habermas. Buti na lang umalis na si Rani. Kasi baka mali yung sasabihin ko kay Habermas. Mas alam niya si Habermas sa akin. Anyway, Habermas is quite a foundational critical theorist, right? He's one of our favorites, although he's the second generation. He confronted some of the most problematic realities of postmodernity and offered a way founded on justice and solidarity to confront these problems. One of his main questions was the possibility of building a shared conception of the good in post-traditional societies. That's exactly for us, di ba? Parang how do you have a shared conception of good in a post-traditional society? In the postmodern situation, when the West woke to the reality that theirs was not the only, although still most superior rationality, they began to question the possibility of having a shared conception of the good in a multiplicity of rationalities. Kasi iba-iba na yung rationalities, and then all of a sudden, it's not just that white Kantian male rationality that's valid, right? So all of a sudden, they begin to confront that. So, in the late 20th century, as the world turned more radically global, the Western world realized that there were other possibly also legitimate rationalities than the dominant male abstract systematic system of meaning-giving. This was the time of the assertion of the woman's way of knowing, the women's ways of knowing, diba? The Black Power movement and the post-colonial discourses of the colonized others. This was the time of the other when Western civilizations were being questioned for their totalizing orientations by their own thinkers. The time when the West began to question its naive belief that their rationality bore a universal ground for the good, the authentically rational. Now, how can humanity come to a shared conception of the good when the legitimacy of white male rationality was so clearly losing its legitimacy? This was, after all, the era of the Great Wars and the time when the abuses of the Western colonial legacy was being questioned. And especially now when we're coming to an awareness of how the global market was really causing greater destruction and misery than it really claimed to cause such great good. So this is the background for the need for the development of a critical theory that addresses these challenges to the dominant system. Habermas addressed the problem by proposing a discourse theory that allows a multi-rational society to come to a shared conception of the good. In a particularly profound analysis of communicative practice, in terms of life, world, and systems, he explained how, in praxis, dominant systems are formed that shape our ways of seeing and being in the world. So he showed us how these dominant systems are formed, how these dominant ideologies are formed, and how they shape our being in the world. He also showed how, through discourse, societies can collectively critique their defining ideologies, how we as a collective can critique our own ideologies and justly come to a shared will and opinion building societal process that will ensure solidarity among citizens. Habermas's theory is important. Why? Because it shows both how to critique the dominant system, which we may not even be aware of, and he also shows ways of collectively and critically building an ideology that can bind autonomous, rational, and free individuals. Okay? Because in the end, our society can never be ideology-free, right? I mean, if we take it just to mean the dominant rationality that frames us and gathers us into a shared will. But Habermas shows us that we can come to a shared opinion and will through processes that are fair and just. So the discourse ethics procedure that Habermas formulated is precisely founded on the understanding that human beings are autonomous rational beings who are capable of legislating for themselves a shared conception of the world. Diba? That's the basic. He's still Kantian, diba? In that way, or in every way, perhaps. Okay. Given this fundamental capability, procedures for discourse are formulated for those autonomous lawgivers. These procedures allow for the arena for encounter of rational minds in order to share their deepest convictions and mutually critique each other's understanding of the good. These procedures ensure that all persons are allowed to fairly express their conceptions of the good to each other in such a way that all the participants in fair discourse are able to examine the limitations of their own and each other's particular conception of the good. That's the value of Habermasian discourse theory. It allows us to encounter each other and bring to each other's awareness our own positions and our own conceptions of what we understand to be the good. However, one wonders if Habermas's assumptions about fair discourse are themselves critical enough. The basic assumption of Habermas is that the person most capable of building a multi-rational society is autonomous and rational in the Western mode. What do I mean by the Western mode of autonomous personhood? And here I'm kind of treading on unsure ground. Somewhat unsure ground. Okay. Why? Because it's hard to prove, but you can feel it. Okay, just basta. So, just tolerate what I'm gonna do next. Anyway, you're the ones who invited me. Okay. So, I'm just gonna try to give you a sense of what I'm sensing, but I'm not gonna be totally precise about it yet. This is a work in progress. Okay. So the rational Western man is a person who exists primarily as an individual capable of coming to knowledge using his own reason, which they can check against the understanding of others. Baka at this point, yung mga feminists dyan say, he's so sexist, he's not using the he, she, or she form. This is on purpose. I really think Western rationality is male. Okay? That's why I'm using the he form. Okay? I think feminists would contend, in fact, that Western philosophy is mainly a male form of conceiving the world. But that's another issue altogether. So, this person is confident that his use of reason will give him a workable understanding of the world because reason has processes of self-verification. Reason has a way of validating its understanding of the world by ensuring that all insights into the real are acceptable to its established system of meaning-giving based on its categories of understanding. Still very Kantian, diba? But I think in the end, this is what rationality means. When you're trying to be a guardian of rationality, yan yung ginaguard mo. Okay? This is useful because although others may have a different understanding of the world, these various conceptions of reality are reconcilable because fundamentally they are founded on the same systems of meaning formation. I suspect that each person is thought to be capable of coming to a shared conception of the good because they share the same categories of understanding, and that the use of these categories can be disciplined and universalized as we have in science to allow for a shared opinion and will formation. Actually, this isn't so clear in Habermas, but it's very clear in Rawls. Okay. But I'm not talking about Rawls, but it's really clear in Rawls. Okay, anyway. Okay. It is, diba? In a sense, you sense when you're reading Rawls, he suspects that deep inside everyone has the same categories of understanding to apply to reality. And when we discourse, all we're trying to do is get at that very core thing. It's also very Husserlian, but never mind, we're not talking about Husserl. Okay. This is why Habermas's main concern for fair solidarity building discourse is procedural. I suspect that the autonomous lawmaker worthy of Habermasian discourse is the bearer of Kantian rationality, the person who knows that the key to understanding the world is the proper or disciplined use of self-verifying reason. It is also a person who is not intuitively connected to the world as a unified cosmos because autonomous reason means an independence from any transcendent order. It is the freedom from the idea that the world has a transcendent order and that genuine human knowing is the opening to the transcendent order and articulating reality according to that order. The autonomous person is the bearer of the structure of knowing using his reason alone. Meaning is constructed by that reason and its systems independently of a belief that the world is a bearer of its own meaning. Because the autonomy isn't just an autonomy from authority. It's also the autonomy from the authority of a world that is inherently meaningful. So discourse theory proceeds on the understanding that rational persons construct the good as a law that all persons of good reason can abide by. That's the important thing naman. It's not really a quest for truth per se, but discourse theory is really a quest for articulating the good that we can all agree with, that all reasonable people can abide by. So the good is agreed upon not because it reflects the world as it presences, but because it is acceptable to all persons capable of rational discourse. In this way, the fair system of discourse becomes oriented toward the building of society based on the rationality of Western men. Habermas, without stating it, already legitimizes Western male rationality and delegitimizes the other rationalities, especially those who are known as traditional, tribal, or metaphysical. And you will see really the Filipino authors, us, okay, who apply discourse theory or critical theory to reading Philippine society. Diba? You already can smell the bias against people who think in a traditional manner or who have a metaphysical background or have a traditional sense of understanding the world. That's why, this is for me the point. Guys, I'm a Habermasian scholar in a sense. Okay, not a good one maybe, but I am. I mean, the Governing the Other book, okay, was actually mainly an argument following Habermasian conceptions of society and governance applied to Philippine realities. Okay, so in a sense, I do agree with Habermas, diba? But for me, the shortcoming of when you're using a Habermasian lens for reading Philippine society is immediately you are put into a lens that is immediately against the rationality of your people. Especially those mga masang yan. Diba? Those mga detardards, whatever they are. Those mga, those masses, they don't think. Oh, because they didn't study. Oh, because they're not educated. That's how philosophy people in the Philippines sound like when they're talking about their own people. And you're thinking, why is that? Well, they're supposed to be critical theorists, right? They're supposed to be super critical. But the thing is, I'm saying maybe the lens already biases you immediately against particular rationalities. Okay? So this is because Habermas places as the higher rationality that of the autonomous male thinker rooted in the abstract thinking of pure and practical reason that tend to accept as legitimate scientific forms of reasoning abstracted from a meaningful cosmos. Immediately and unconsciously, this places the westernized rationality on a level of that Habermas knows to higher than a level of what Habermas labels as metaphysical or traditional rationality. Now, this is the reason why whenever Filipino scholars apply discourse theory perspectives to political reform in the Philippines, their prescriptions are always oriented toward the implementation of systems of discourse that favor Western educated rationalities. Sorry. This can be seen in the critical view of the masses, the uneducated, and traditional peoples who are unable to participate in rational discourse, as well as the uncritical critiques of patronage politics, for instance, of tribal ways of proceeding. Rational discourse here means discourse that favors data-based, argumentative thinking, where claims to truth are only accepted when substantiated by grounds acceptable to systematic justification. In other words, dun sa mga dilawan sa inyo, pansinin nyo lang kung paano yung sinasagot yung mga detardists dyan. Diba? Lagi nyo na sabi, oh my God, you're so stupid. Is that logical? Why are they not thinking logically? Oh, look at how they're using data. You don't use statistics that way, right? How can you dialogue with people you're dissing? Diba? Okay, anyways. That's why I'm not part of that whole debate. In other words, the only acceptable claims to legitimacy are claims that are supported by the ways of thinking of Kantian rationality. Thus, most philosophical reflection on political, electoral, and economic reform in the Philippines tends to believe that the empowerment of the margins will only genuinely be realized when the disempowered are educated in the ways of Western democracy. Thus, our focus as reformers is always on the education of our people in citizenship. Diba? And we have a really important role to play there, right? Because, as philosophy teachers, and I'm not saying we're philosophers, but as philosophy teachers, our role is to teach our students critical thinking, diba? The proper use of reason, the emancipation of reason. We are after all the guardians of critical thinking and reason, right? But whenever we teach them critical thinking and reason, what we're really just teaching them is to think correctly as citizens in a proper Western democracy, right? That's basically all we're teaching them. And in fact, that's the great unifier. If we want to unify this nation in the end, that's the great unifier, right? When you cement over all otherness and just create a dominant rationality, which will make them good citizens. And it just so happens that it shows that the basis of good citizenship is this kind of rationality. And that's why we've taken it on whenever we do critiques of Philippine politics and governance and society. We've taken on the discourse, which is critical of the way most Filipinos think. And I think that should give us pause to wonder. Okay. Anyway, it is possible that our critical theory lenses uncritically contribute to the westernization of the world. I'm not anti-Western, okay? I'm just saying that this is the dominant rationality that we're confronting, and we have to be critical of. This is because critical theory, being a child of the Western Findisip crisis, is really oriented toward a critique of the shortfalls of Western rationalities in order to reform it and make the Western world more critically rational. However, the fundamental faith in Western rationality was never really abandoned by critical theory. In order to genuinely, diba, like in the talk of Rani, he talks about nga Habermas insists that we are guardians of rationality, right? But what rationality? Whose rationality? Diba? However, so there is a fundamental faith in Western rationality. In order to genuinely critique the unchallenged dominant Western rationality, we must genuinely begin to explore the legitimacy of other rationalities that themselves make alternate truth claims founded on other forms of reason. Our task as adherents of critical reason is to embrace its mission of ideology critique and push it further by grounding our critique of society on even more radically other grounds. Of course, the only really radical ground of ideology critique is the transcendent rationality that is not influenced by any ideology. Eh, wala namang ganon, di ba? However, there is no such human perspective. The best we can do is to explore the grounds of legitimacy of other claims to truth and place them in just and equal discourse with the dominant rationality. In our case, this concretely means exploring indigenous, non-Western rationalities which could enrich the discourse of the good. And by indigenous, I don't mean IP lang, although that's part of it, right? But I mean like, you know, those people selling corn outside, diba? Or the people sweeping your streets, diba? Or the people who voted for President Duterte. Okay? The only way to genuinely critique one's rationality is if there is another perspective that challenges one's assumptions to the very ground of our assumptions. So far, the West has only dialogued with itself and its junior partners who could only join the discourse if they fit their own rationalities to the forms acceptable to the dominant culture. So, I guess if any of you are writing and publishing, you've already felt the pressure to just conform what you're talking about and what you're writing about and the way you write about things to the dominant way that journals argue, right? So you have to conform to the way they footnote, you have to conform even to the questions they ask, you have to conform, like even if you're gonna critique Philippine society, there's a style of critiquing Philippine society in philosophy that you just basically have to follow if you want to be published. Diba? Nasa-sense niyo ba yun? In the Philippine context, it has always been easier for local thinkers to engage the mainstream discourse of our discipline if we tailor our social analysis to dominant paradigms of thinking. Siyempre, nandiyan yung Marxist, ideological critique, feminist theory, post-colonial criticism, and deconstruction. Yan yung mga favorite, maarte ways of making critique, diba? The reason is because we have not been able to demonstrate the ground of legitimacy for our own indigenous forms of inquiry. There are too few studies that explore how the indigenous rationalities present a rigorous frame for reading social phenomenon. In order to explore the legitimacy of indigenous discourse, we must promote studies that do not merely translate or justify the native in terms of the dominant rationality. Rather, we must that's another style naman of philosophizing, di ba? You go explore what do the mga Igorot mean by this, di ba? What do the mga Itnig mean by this, and what the Maranao conception of heaven, mga ganyan. Pero basically, what you're doing is you're trying to show how these indigenous philosophies can fit into something we call philosophy, which is basically Western philosophy, di ba? So these studies we must articulate these rationalities in a way that demonstrates the value of their own form of knowing on their terms. Okay. These studies must have rigor in the sense that they can legitimately articulate the dynamic play that brings these systems of understanding their own structure and dynamism. We must have studies that are not just an interpretation of other rationalities in the mode defined as legitimate by the dominant academic rationalities. Rather, we must engage these rationalities in a way that both allows the rationality to demonstrate its own way of meaning-giving in order for others and even the adherents of the rationality to recognize how it gives meaning to the world that presences in a way that's different from the dominant, or in a way that is other than the dominant. So these alternative meaning-giving systems could allow for the most authentic critique of the dominant rationality which critical theory fundamentally seeks to realize. This is because the only way any society can come to a direct understanding of its dominant systems is if it is able to dialogue with a rationality that can genuinely question its most basic premises, right? So how can you have a society, how can you begin to critique the most basic premises of any ideological frame or any rationality if you're always questioning it within the frame of that rationality? See, that's my problem with climate change. Well, I have many problems with climate change, but one of my main problems with finding a solution to climate change, right? We're always trying to figure out, well, how do we respond to the crisis of climate change? How do we bring about a new way of proceeding such that climate change or that we can really avert the disasters of climate change? Well, we can't really avert the disasters of climate change, but at least we can mitigate them. And then our responses are always within the very framework of the rationality that caused climate change, right? We're always trying to argue against climate change by trying to figure out through Western science, Western economics, and Western social systems how to respond to climate change, when in the end, this was really a problem foisted upon us by the imposition of Western rationalities, right? So now we're always trying to critique the Western rationality. Within the Western rationality, how can you begin to critique its very basic premises if you're not coming from a genuinely other perspective? That's my point. Okay. Now, there have been some notable attempts at this kind of work, articulating native rationality or indigenous rationalities. I would like to cite here the works of Zeus Salazar and Reynaldo Ileto in history, Virgilio Almario in literature, and Grace Nono in ethnomusicology. Did you know that Grace Nono was an ethnomusicologist? Yeah, she's a doctor. Okay. So among Salazar's notable works is his Ang Cartilla ni Emilio Jacinto. I mean, if there's one Salazar book you have to read, you know naman Zeus Salazar, right? The god of Philippine history. In his mind. Anyway, yeah. But if you're going to read one book by Zeus Salazar, I think you should really focus, you should choose Ang Cartilla ni Emilio Jacinto. It's a small book, but I think it's a really brilliantly argued book that shows he argues here against the thesis that the ideology of the Katipunan is a mere indigenization of the liberal ideals of the French Revolution and the European Enlightenment. In fact, there's a very important recent book in the Ateneo University Press. I mean, if you're fans, since it's the day after, since we just celebrated Bonifacio Day, if you're fans of the Katipunan, this book is a must-have at sale yata ngayon, so maybe you can get it. It's called Light of Liberty by Richardson. Okay, it's a very important book because he found a lot of new material never before known, like letters and memos and things written by the Katipunan, and it really throws light, a very important light on their way of thinking, their way of proceeding and such. However, it's interesting, when he presents the Cartilla, Richardson, when he talks about the Cartilla, he dismisses it and just says, you know, this Cartilla, it's really important. But in the end, you know, he's just repeating the ideas of liberty, fraternity, and equality that he got from the French Revolution. But it's interesting because if you actually understand the Cartilla as a Filipino, when he talks about kalayaan, katwiran, liwanag, they're so different from what the French understand or what Western democracies understand. And that's why I thought the first argument against that would really be Salazar's Ang Kartilya ni Emilio Jacinto, where he really shows us that that kalayaan, katwiran, and kapatiran are indigenous ideas that do not merely translate European ideals, but rather articulate a fundamental conception of reality. Salazar, through a genealogy of words and their evolution, shows how the Filipino conception of a good society worth fighting and dying for have a nuance that puts into question the kind of societies we believe the Katipunan should have been building toward. And then of course, Ileto's classic, Passion and Revolution, okay, one of the top 20 most influential books on Southeast Asia. Okay. Walang sawang Passion and Revolution. It's a work that shows how the revolutionary aspirations of the people are rooted in a passion rationality and not so much on the quest for building a modern Western nation state. It wasn't. It was really aimed at building a kaharian ng mga Tagalog. And in order to really understand, I believe, the aspirations of our people today for what kind of nation they want to build, we should look less towards the conceptions of modern nation states and try to understand at least what the kaharian ng mga Tagalog was to the Katipunan. Because at least within the Luzon, Visayas circles, it does make sense. That's really what they aspire for. Okay. And so it explores how the indigenous interpretations of langit was the foundation of our idea of bayan worth fighting and dying for. Ileto showed how the Filipinos appropriated the Catholic narrative as a discourse of liberation for the marginalized natives. These historical studies, mostly accomplished in the Western mode of postmodern scholarship of suspicion, or postmodern scholarships of suspicion, these works, Ileto and Salazar, are really done in a very Western mode. What these studies do is reveal how an what they do is show how an alternate rationality was the bearer of the people's conception of the good, and showed how a recognition of this imposed upon rationality can become a ground for a radical critique of the dominant world order. At least that's what they showed. They dug up this other rationality. I think that's the important thing with Ileto and Zeus Salazar. They were really able to say, look, there's this underlying rationality. It's the way your people think. Whether you agree with it or not, this is what frames their understanding of the world. And it exists, and it defines how they live their lives. Shouldn't you want to recognize it? But then later on, they were able to show too how it can be used to critique the dominant system. I also noticed that Almario is pursuing a seemingly similar project in his massive projects of literary criticism. Okay. Everyone's saying kasi Almario's like gunning for the Nobel Prize. So that's why he keeps publishing whatever. Might be true. But nonetheless, the point is, he's publishing like crazy. He's coming out with all these anthologies and all these commentaries, right? Did you notice? So, if you look at all the Almario, that's the best thing about having your own publishing house, diba? But anyway, and being a national artist, diba? But the thing about Almario is, these days, if you notice, he's published isang daang taon ng nobelang Pilipino, or isang siglo, unang siglo ng nobelang Pilipino. He published ang Pag-ibig ni Andres Bonifacio, published by your own UST publishing house, which is a really brilliant book, I have to say. Then he also came out with the two Jose Rizal books, Jose Rizal bilang nobelista, Jose Rizal bilang makata, and then he came out with Hiyas ng Tulang Pilipino, I think, which is an e-book. And then he also came out with basta marami siyang nilabas yung mga mga kasulatan ng revolusyon ng 1896, something like that. Anyway, some of these are original long arguments. Like, I think one of his best, if you only have to read one, get the UST one, ang Pag-ibig ni Andres Bonifacio, because that's his most sustained and brilliant argument, I think. But if you notice, and some of these are anthologies. Like for instance, he just comes up with a new edition of Florante at Laura. And then he explains. He has an introduction for it. And he also has his own editions of Noli and Fili. which he again has introductions for. Now, if you read all of those introductions and all of those, he has an agenda. Not the Nobel Prize, but he has an intellectual agenda. He's pursuing this project, which shows that in his reading of the novels of Philippine literature, including those of Rizal, and then Florante at Laura, and the literary production of the revolutionaries of 1896, particularly the works of Andres Bonifacio, he shows how the classics of Philippine literature were misjudged by previous scholars because they insisted on reading the works from an American or European aesthetic and academic framework. He labors to show the dynamism of intersecting traditions that bring about these works, and he shows that the works demand their own categories of appreciation than those established for Western works. In this way, Almario argues for a native literary critical practice that is rooted in the lived experience of the people. He shows that the works of the literary traditions generate their own aesthetic categories, rooted in the dynamic play that produces these works. So he shows us that if Filipinos desire to genuinely understand the contribution of Filipino literature to world literature, they must enter the dynamic rationality that produced it and its understanding of the world and the good. Diba? Kaya nga, I think that's why, you know how we always feel so proud that, Philippine literature can be great too. Because, wow, look, Villa has a Penguin edition, right? And then Noli and Philly are in Penguin too. And now Nick Joaquin is already published by Penguin. Parang that's always our affirmation, right? Because like, okay, so we're affirmed by the standards of Penguin novels, which of course are good standards. But then the question is, you think they'll ever publish Pinaglahuan in translation? I think they'll find it too sentimental, too predictable, based on the Western canon of criticism, it won't stand. But then Almario is saying, well, shouldn't it have its own categories of criticism? So in their reading of history and literature, these scholars have shown us how to critically think about the dominant system of reading history and works of literature. They help us understand that other methods are needed to understand the products of our own rationalities and how the dominance of Western rationalities are reductive frames for interpreting our acts and artifacts needed to be challenged. They challenge the Western frames by producing analytical works that made their native readers aware that there are other rationalities that needed to be articulated in order to understand what shapes their people's understanding of the good or the beautiful, despite their being imposed upon by the dominant Western conceptions of the good. These studies are useful in understanding how to critique dominant systems of rationality and how they are applied to demean the other. Okay. However, their own methods are still accomplished within the frame of the dominant rationality. Fundamentally, the otherness of the Philippine novel and the ideology of the revolution were articulated in Western forms of abstraction and systematization. That's why they're rigorous, That's why you can argue with Passion and Revolution and say it's probably inventing its conclusions. But you have to respect the rigor that it applies in analyzing the text and trying to show how you do a textual analysis. But in the end, it's just justifying its conclusions about the other rationality, using the dominant rationality as a tool for justifying what it sees. In short, it's still seeing the marginalized rationality from the perspective of the dominant rationality, trying to convince the dominant rationality that what the marginalized rationality is trying to assert has some legitimacy, right? So how can you enter into a fair discourse when that's always the case? Junior partner. Diba? Yun. Okay. Now, that's why I bring in Grace Nono's work. It's a little crazy, okay? Because it's madrama, it's not very academic. It's very shooty. It's kind of performery. But Grace Nono's work, do you know she has 2 books? One is, okay, I forgot the other one, but one is Babaylan. Okay, this is the one I want to talk about. Something about voices, shared voices, that's the other one. Okay. Anyway, Grace Nono's work shows us a further step in the exploration of the native conception of the world. In her work of ethnomusicology, Babaylan, she shows us how to research on the Babaylan culture and how it demands a different form of research, a different methodology. It's important to engage the Babaylan cosmology with a different method of research because we wish to speak of another way of knowing another world faithfully. Kasi if you want to really enter the Babaylan rationality, you know what a Babaylan is, right? These are the mediators between the human world and the spirit world that bring about healing, that bring about well-being, that bring about certain good to the community, diba? And so she says, if you want to understand them, you have to really enter their world, but it means entering a different rationality. Now, how can you enter a different rationality? Okay? It is another of the systematic rationality of the West that dominates us, and we don't want to just translate this other rationality for consumption by Western systems of comprehension. So, other categories of understanding and articulation are needed. How does one research in a setting where the people about whom one is learning are dwellers in a completely different rationality and in effect belong to a different world? You know, a world where there are duendes and diwatas, diba? But not so other to many of us, right? It seems that the only way of genuinely engaging this world and its presencing is strong immersion that fully opens to its rationality and its modes of presencing. It is an immersion that prioritizes the desire of reducing the world's presencing and its life world to the abstract systems of Western invoice taking. Rather, the aim would be to focus on what many Filipino researchers are now realizing is a process of pakikipagkapwa as a mode of research. I don't think as philosophy people we're trained to do that. And if you're a philosophy person trained in the social sciences, the more you're not trained to do this, right? But as ethnomusicologists are beginning to understand, because they're just trying to learn how to play the instruments and understand the world and the context of these instruments, they've realized that pakikipagkapwa is a method of research. Pakikipagkapwa as a method of research aims less at abstract systematization and more at a deeper understanding that reaches the levels of sympathetic understanding. It's a kind of understanding where we understand the other reality, but with the insight of one who is able to enter the world of the other, even if one is other than that other. Thus, techniques of pakikipagkapwa or entering the world of the kapwa as a sympathetic other need to be applied. So according to Nonod, these are possible tools to use. Pakigambit, I'm sorry, I'm not really pronouncing this properly, I know. Some of them are Bisaya, some of them are Mindanaoan languages. Anyway, she speaks about pakigambit or the reciprocity of time and life sharing, just wasting time with others. Diba? This act of time sharing or life sharing is really a dwelling, what we would understand to be a dwelling in the world of the others. This sharing of self does not allow for the best form of systematic abstraction that would lead to manipulation, of course. However, it allows for the thinker to be immersed in the world of the other. More than comprehending, this is about a dwelling with the other and understanding from their perspective. Thus, there's also pagkaanaa, tama ba yun? Or sensing the presence, panuluktok or gaining insight through intuition, pamalandong or engaging in forms of contemplation to arrive at a deeper truth, pagtugyan or surrender to the experience and the spirits making themselves manifest, pagdawat or acceptance of the experience that is being given, and pag-agas or opening to the cosmos in a spirit-like communion. Okay. One of for her, the deepest way of knowing is if you can really get into the panag-abyan. An abyan is a helper spirit. Okay? And somehow there are processes by which one is allowed to meet the abyan of the Babaylan. Okay? Or at least get deeper insight into how the abyan and the diwatas really think and and what they want to communicate. So this is accomplished by participating in learning the songs and participating in the rituals, of course, but also being alert and discerning of damgu or dreams, timala or signs, buna-buna or thoughts, and pagbati, feelings and sensations. So, basically, if you're a researcher and then you're in this world, you're supposed to be alert to, did you have a dream? What did it try to tell you? What was the dream telling you? Diba? Was it from the Abyan? Signs like, oh, did I get, when I was thinking about this thing, why did I see this particular bird? Or why did I see a moth with this color? And then thoughts. Do stray thoughts enter your head all of a sudden while you're just not really contemplating anything particularly, but then a stray thought enters your head that gives you a solution to an idea that you are trying to work out, right? And do you also have certain feelings and sensations? Like when you're walking into this forest, you feel that it's menacing and cold. Maybe that's the presence of a kind of diwata, right? You know what I'm saying? Of course, this is all crazy, guys. It's not the things we're gonna do because we're rational philosophers. But I'm saying, look at this. These ethnomusicologists, and that's fine, they can have that, they're weird. But these weird ethnomusicologists, they have a different way of exploring. You know, not like us, we're sitting in we're just making sure these concepts connect to each other, right? Or if you're a social scientist, you get certain forms of legitimate forms of research like the FGD, the ever important KII, the ways of observing certain material reality that can corroborate whatever kinds of information your informants give you, you know, that kind of thing. But you're not listening to spirits. You're not paying attention to your dreams while you're doing this research. Diba? You're not aware of your feelings because feelings have nothing to do with rationality. You know what I'm saying? But I'm just saying, these are spiritual, emotive, and relational ways of knowing that allow spirits to presence to us. So of course, if you're going to research on spirits, you have to enter this kind of rationality and this kind of methodology. You know what I'm saying? Right? I'm telling you, personally, I don't think I could do this kind of research. Okay? But I'm just saying, it's funny, right, when you hear about it, like, oh my God, these ethnomusicologists, they must be fun, they're so weird. But you know, in a sense, too, you have to say, wait a minute, but that's legitimate. If you want to genuinely know the world that you're going to explore, especially the world where Dewatas actually exist for the people, you have to have a different frame of openness. Okay. So, in this way, she was able to invite the Babaylan, the community, and the spirits to realize a kind of knowing that is communal and participatory. Plus, that's the other thing. It's not the researcher looking at, but it is a process for her that is communal and participatory. We enter into altered states and other rationalities that allow us to commune with nature, elders, spirits, and ancestors. In this methodology, the spirits and the guides become co-researchers. So maybe the spirits are co-researchers giving you insights through your dreams. Mga ganyan, di ba? Who are open to our collaboration if we treat them with respect. That's the claim, actually, that Grace Nono is making. And if we succeed in entering the world of the Babaylan and their Abyan, through these alternate methodologies, we will be able to explore a moral cosmos that is spirit-filled. We will get a glimpse of a world where our actions and our ways of being conforms to the cosmic order and that we are all responsible for each other. Because through discourse with spirits, we realize that human good fortune and well-being is tied to the well-being and good fortune of others. It's a universe where knowledge and power are acquired through negotiation and communion. The arrival at the truth and understanding of the world is rooted in a kind of thinking that allows the human knower a communion with other knowers. Anyway, at this point, one may wonder why I am talking about such a strange idea for alternate research methods. Now, let's return. Okay. Anyway, I'm not telling us to do that kind of research. I don't think most of us are capable anyway, right? But those of us who are probably must actually enter that kind of research. Why? Because life brings about it is a more authentic representation of an alternate rationality. Because for instance, if you read Ileto and Zeus and Salazar and if you read Ileto, Salazar and Almario, for instance, you can see that they're really grappling with articulating another rationality. But at the same time, well Almario, it's a little easier because it's just dealing with literature. Right? So it's easier to enter into the rationality of the writer. But if, like for instance, Ileto, although he can really, I think it's a really groundbreaking work because it shows us how an alternate rationality can actually function. He's still not functioning from deep enough to be able to articulate what it's really seeing. Right? I think then we should find other ways to get us deeper into the alternate rationality. Now, why is that important? Let's return to our concept of critical theory. Critical theory is a philosophical way of proceeding that allows people to unearth the ideologies that frame our social realities. It is a fruitful way of critiquing the growing influence of capitalism, the formation of mass society, and the growing commodification of our relationships with the world and each other. With the various forms of ideology critique that unearth the blinders that shape the enframed self-realization of a supposed enlightened, emancipated Western humanity. When applied to Philippine realities, the critique begins with the assumption that our traditional rationalities are, like capitalist and commodifying rationalities, unexamined frames for enslavement. Right? Whenever we critique our own society and critique our own systems of proceeding, we're always assuming that these are like the ideologies of the West, which have tended to enframe us and enslave us. Nobody has really tried to begin to understand and appreciate and explain why the patronage system is important to the people anyway. Right? What are the real conceptions of development? No one has really tried to articulate what our people's conception of development is and what a nation worth living in would look like. Right? But in order to do that, because none of us are really listening to them. All we're thinking about are Millennium Development Goals, what the latest World Bank thing about what the latest development system would be, whether it's people's empowerment, whether it's a reform of procurement processes, whatever, diba? In the end, yeah, we're always suspicious about our own rationalities. Okay, thus, immediately we see that these rationalities are always something to be critical about and destructive. Just like the kind of ideologies that the critical theory people critique. The very basis of critique is a Western frame, the very basis of the critique of our own society is a Western frame of understanding a genuinely emancipated person. As we stated, this emancipated person is a person who is an individual who can will the good by legislating for himself the ought. We can see how in an uncritical use of critical theory or any Western form of emancipatory thinking, it can prejudice the discovery of the emancipatory discourse of other rationalities. Because immediately you marginalize the other. Okay? This is because the means to understand the rationality of non-Western or traditional rationalities run counter to the methods of an autonomous, critical, emancipated rationality. Fundamentally, the articulation of some alternative rationalities calls for the work of communal research grounded on sympathetic opening to the world that is other than the dominant system. Thus, it's essential that we somehow achieve a kind of research methodology that does not completely serve the unconscious agenda of Westernization. Again, for a deep and radical critique of the dominant Western paradigm, which we're not trying to overthrow, I'm just talking about critique, okay? We need categories of critique that do not serve to strengthen the imposition of the dominant rationality. This means we should cultivate a means to genuinely articulate our traditional rationalities as a counter-rationality that could at least dialogue at par with the dominant rationality. This is what I mean by a more critical theory. We need to explore these queer ways of knowing other worlds. And they're really queer ways of knowing other worlds. I use queer in the old sense. But I'm also taking it away from the, I'm also borrowing it from the queers again. Okay? But we really need queer ways of knowing other worlds, because that is the only way we can challenge the dominant rationality to an extent that it can see its limits and possibilities from a more critical perspective. But this demands that we build a new scholarship. It really demands that we build a new scholarship that allows marginalized rationalities to fairly discourse with the dominant on their own terms. Okay. That's the end of my written thing, and I guess it should be the end of my talk. But I just want to add, that's, for me, it's really hard because my training is basically Western. Okay. The way I write is very Western, you know. I couldn't live in an alternate rationality. That's because that's my generation, diba? Now, but should we cultivate this continuing process of philosophizing in this mood? Because my point is, and that's what we're doing. Basically, that's what we're doing. You know, in Philippine universities today, we're playing catch up with the West. Okay, and that's why we want. That's why. If you are teachers, you know that in your university you're probably building some kind of peer-reviewed journal, right? Which you're trying to ask some people to be part of, especially if they have credentials as publishing in Western journals, right? And you're all there, and you're all counting, and then you have this weird counting system of what's the impact of your work? How the hell do I know what the impact of my work is? Only God can tell the impact of my work. Don't ask me the impact of my work. What's the impact factor? I don't know. As ang impacto factor meron. Pero yung impact factor, seryoso ka ba? Iba na lang yung tanongin mo. I'm not playing that game. I am not playing that game. I just write what I need to write. Right? Really critical research we have to be doing. And that's so sad because you won't be promoted if you do it. I am telling you now, you will not be promoted if you do this thing. Okay? You will not. Okay. You won't even get your PhD doing this thing. You want to get your PhD the best way possible, just write about some dead white guy. Okay? Yun lang yun. Ganun lang kasimple yun. Write about some dead white guy and try to figure out what hasn't been said about this dead white guy. And if you're a woman, good for you, you can always critique him from a feminist perspective. Oh, that Mill, diba? Oh, that Plato, really? Diba? Oh, that's all you have to do. Get a PhD, that's fine, right? But then, see, my point is that that's the play, it's the game, right? You just have to sound like them and act like them, walk the walk, talk the talk. It's still true. But my point is, we're facing the end of this civilization. I'm not talking about the end of the world per se. We're facing the end of this civilization in the sense that we have to enrich this dominant global civilization that faces us. And the way we're proceeding now is we're really unconsciously pushing the agenda of this dominant global. Do I sound like a crazy person now? Maybe I should be doing this in the overpass. But anyway, I should have a big cart that's saying, like, you know, down with it. But it's true, we need to be able to confront the dominant system that exists today because it's driving us to our own self-destruction, diba? And we do want to enrich this world, and we do want to create a better world, but it won't happen if there's nothing, if the myopia of what Gandhi called the one-eyed giant continues to just prance through the world. And that's why I think we need alternate ways of doing this, diba? Yun na nga lang, again, I say to you this, and this is really a fact, you won't be promoted, diba? This is only the work of the brave, okay? Because you probably won't be published, except in those crazy websites, right? You probably won't be promoted, diba? Yeah, you probably won't be promoted. You probably won't be promoted, okay? But that's why it's the work of the brave, or maybe the work of the old. That's why I think for you people on tenure, for you people on professorship track, my message to you is, just do whatever pouring you have to do to become a full professor. Then when you are a full professor, nobody cares
Okay. Of course, they care what you do. But you won't care anymore what you do because there's nowhere else to go. Right? Once you're full professor, there's nowhere else to go but down. So, okay, you're dying anyway. Might as well do this research. Right? Anyway, so this is an invitation for all of you to rush your full professorship tracks in order to do the real work that has to be done. There, thank you.